Hello, dear Ron Morrain. It's great to have you here today. Can you give us, please, a brief about yourself?
Well, very quickly, I'm an American, and I live and work in Germany. Have lived in Europe for over 30 years, most of my adult life, and have traveled around the world, worked around the world. I go to many conferences talking about the creation of ready-made mind maps and how they're very powerful instruments to be using in the language learning process, and also a lot about task-based learning and problem-based learning. I'm a lecturing professor at a major university here in Germany, and I also own 3 language schools here in Germany.
Yeah, that's overwhelming. Okay, most welcome. So let's go to our first question. Okay?
Ready?
Yeah, is it correct to try to remember tons of words at once?
Well, if we look at the average number of words that a person really owns in their mother language, we'll see that it's probably not very much as we think. But a lot of that has to do with a lot of different factors and how many words we actually own in our mother language. And it has to do with our social capital, that is, how we grew up, the environment that we grew up in, and all of the influences that has in the development of language and vocabulary. And then, of course, our education, our travel experiences, life experiences, work experiences. And as we grow and develop as an individual in our what's called first language ego, we also develop words around that. So, of course, the more a person is experienced in life, and the more a person has experience in work, they're going to develop their vocabulary along with that. So we can't say that an average person has 3,000 words, but it does depend on the individual and a lot of the things that they bring to the table.
Yeah.
Now, when we get into the second language or third language, I speak 4 languages. So I know that my vocabulary in German is pretty much the same as in English because German is a real language for me. I live in Germany. I work in a German environment. I hold meetings in German. German is the language I use for social communication. So the
Mhm.
language is very strong there. But although
Okay.
I speak Spanish, it's not the same thing because I don't live in a Spanish world. And although I do speak Spanish,
Okay.
I don't have the same vocabulary in Spanish that I do have in German. And
So
I'm
you
not even
mean
going to
it's
get
like a developmental process? It
it is
develops
a
with work.
development process, but development in the sense of real life interactions and how we combine all of these things that are going on in our life to the language that's needed to communicate in that language. So we build words like that. But your question is about should we remember tons of words? Well, that's going to be pretty difficult, especially when you're into the second language, because the only way that you're really going to remember words is if you're using them. Now, you can get into what's called memory, memorizing, and rote learning, which, of course, is a very traditional approach to learning vocabulary. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially when you're young. But when you're older, you need to find practical applications to that vocabulary. And if it's not something that you can, use, then you're not going to remember those words. So it's use it or lose it in that sense,
Oh,
especially in the second language development of the personal development in the second language. So
okay.
I would say it's a no and yes answer to that question.
Okay, next question. Is it helpful to try to memorize all grammar rules at once?
Well, I'm going to be very Socratic in this way, and I'm going to say, think about your mother language and how many grammar rules do you know in your mother language, and then all of a sudden we expect our students to come and memorize all these grammar rules. And, you know, I, I in promoting task-based learning and project-based learning, I do believe that we talk about the passive skills and the active skills of language learning. And I always add grammar as the fifth skill. So, we have
Mhm.
speaking and writing as the active skills and reading and listening as the passive skills. But I do add grammar to that. but I do believe that grammar should be learned naturally. Now, I base that opinion
Hey,
on my
yeah.
personal life experience of how I learned languages. And so I kind of use that life experience that I have to teach grammar. And I believe that teachers shouldn't just artificially throw that out there and say, today we're going to do the present simple, and we're going to, tomorrow we're going to do the past simple, and then Wednesday we're going to do the present perfect. That's sort of an unnatural approach to teaching grammar.
Yeah.
I believe in the simple rule of let grammar happen. And when
Hmm.
we see what grammar the students need, then we start to teach. But don't teach grammar unnaturally, and explain rules to them as they're using it when they make the mistake. This is a skill that teachers need to learn when, it's a part of error correction, error management
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
language learning.
Okay. Great. The next question: is listening in English important?
Well, listening in any language is important. Yeah. And when we really think about how we as an individual, no matter what language we speak as a mother language, what really comes first? And, go back to that analogy, what
Hmm.
came first, the chicken or the egg? But in this case right here, when we really think about how we learn languages and our mother language, listening is the first thing
Listening
that
comes the first.
starts.
Yeah.
It's the
Perfect.
first thing we have. I know that. How did I learn German? How did I learn Spanish? How did I learn English? My parents are first generation Americans. My
Hmm.
mother's German and my father's Spanish, and so my mother wanted to make sure that I incorporated all those languages. So what did she do? She allowed me to go to my father's family on the weekends and spend the weekend with them, and they spoke Spanish, and that's how I learned it, from listening first.
Yeah.
It took many years for me to really get it out of my mouth and feel brave to start
Hmm.
speaking Spanish. I was a teenager when I started speaking Spanish, even though I was around it my whole childhood.
Oh, yeah.
So it started with listening, and
Yeah.
that's the natural way of acquisition. And that, comes to the point of unnatural language learning and natural language acquisition.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it starts with listening.
Perfect. Next question: should students read classic literature to learn new words?
Well, I'm an avid reader, and as an avid reader, and I love reading, I read a lot. And I have to say, I want to say so badly, 100% yes, they should read the classic literature, and they should read all the books that I like and things. And while I was learning to be a teacher and going through university, I did take 2 semesters of Shakespeare.
Oh, yeah. Very
And
interesting.
so, I like that, but
Mhm.
that might not be very practical for beginners to be reading Shakespeare. They
Yeah.
might not
Yeah.
understand that. So when it comes to classic literature, I think there's these redacted readers, these adapted readers that
Yeah.
you can actually read, the graded readers, yeah,
Mhm.
where you can still read a classic book, maybe at a A2 or B1 level, and so yes, it is possible for people to still read classic literature, but not the original text, because that might be too complicated. But definitely at the B1 level, they should start reading outside the class. And
Yeah.
any teacher, and I'm called me old-fashioned if you want to, but I do believe that passive skill of reading is extremely important and
Mhm.
we need to make
Yeah.
reading interesting for students. And I'm going to go back to, because I'm just an avid reader, okay? Um, I remember my fourth class teacher used to have a corner inside the room. And when we were finished with our task inside the classroom, we could go to the reading corner and pick a book and read and sometimes for 20 or 30 minutes. And it was reading became a reward for us finishing our work. So she made reading interesting for us. And she took us to the public library every 2 weeks, where we
Yeah.
had a professional reader read a book to us in the library. So I became
Oh,
very interested in reading at a very early age.
yeah.
And so I think teachers need to think about how we're incorporating reading into the classroom. Is it just reading from a course book? Well, that might not be very exciting. But we have to find other things that makes reading interesting for our young learners. And I have to say, at working in a university, it becomes even more difficult because,
Yeah,
the students only read what they're supposed to be reading, and that's
yeah,
it. I'm very lucky if I can get them to just read what I send them. But I try to create things to make reading interesting for everyone, my young learners, my university students, as well as my adult learners. So
perfect.
reading is
Then,
important. And it doesn't have to be classical literature. I have to say that some of the
yeah.
things I like to read are, international relations, politics, biographies of
Mm,
interesting people in history. So, but that might be boring for somebody else, but let them find something that they're interested in to
yeah,
promote reading.
good. So let's jump in the next question. Should students spend all their time studying from textbooks?
Well, after I just said all that about reading, I don't want to contradict myself, okay? But uh, when you say the word textbook, I want to make a differentiation here between a textbook and a course book. Because textbooks, if you're studying psychology, well, that's going to be a little bit different. And I consider that a textbook, whereas a course
Mhm.
book would be something about more that's used in a language learning class that's put out by
Oh, yeah.
major
Okay.
publishers. And so, should they spend all their time studying from textbooks? Well, looking at from the textbook side, no. The
Okay.
professors and teachers tell you, you have to read this chapter. But if we teach them at an early age to take notes while they're reading, especially from textbooks, that they can look at their notes and learn how to be successful in reading and studying from textbooks. I learned this as a young teenager at school because I had great teachers. I have to say, I've been lucky in my life.
That's
One of
great.
the things I have to say is I feel that I'm obligated to repeat what I learned from those great role models that I had as
Mhm.
teachers as a young man, and in not just in primary school but secondary school and university.
Perfect.
I think that if you learn how to really read successfully and study successfully from a textbook, that you will really retain that information. And it just is not information in your head, it turns into knowledge. And there is a
Yeah.
difference between information and knowledge.
Sure. Next question. Should students consider the target language a task to complete?
Well, I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that question because
What I mean is that, like when a student is going to sit an exam, for example,
Mhm.
for English, should they study all the English language at once, all the grammar, all the vocabulary to sit the exam, or like it's a process they can develop with time?
uh, no, that's going to go depends heavily on the individual themselves.
Mhm.
Uh, Individuals have different learning styles and preferences. Uh, they also have different interests, and all of a sudden, when they're studying for exam, they're confronted with topics that they know nothing about.
Yeah.
And so, a good exams teacher should be aware of the topics that, come up in exams. Now, a lot of those topics that come up in exams are put forth by the European community. So I ask all teachers who are doing exam preparation, classes to look at the European framework for languages and see what level they're doing. Is it going to be a B1 or B2 level? See what topics are being covered and try to cover those with students in a 360-degree manner, with speaking, writing, listening, and things. But of course, you may know that I really like to promote ready-made mind maps and really going beyond the course book. So this is an important part of the exam-oriented learning. I had one of the largest test centers here in this part of Germany, where we were doing, many exams every month. We were doing at least 500 to 600 exams just for teachers every year, and of course, then the students as well. Yes, I say that they should, okay, study the target language that they're going to be preparing for, whether
Yeah.
that be English, Spanish, French, whatever it is. Yeah, and approach it from uh, the passive skills and active skills, and that we activate all of those in the learning process. And that helps them to better be prepared for the exam. and also lowers a little bit of the stress that they might be feeling in getting ready for the exam.
Sure. Okay, next question. What about relying on language schools? Similar question to the textbooks.
Well, there's a difference between a language center, which is usually run by the university. Most major universities do have profit centers. The language schools are usually separate from English studies, from studying English as a language they're going to teach, because that's more the didactical pedagogical approach. They have to learn all those theories and methodologies. Uh, but language centers where they just teach language, should we rely on them? Well, there are some that are very reliable.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not forget that it is a multi-billion-dollar business. And language schools, of course, many, the franchise schools especially, have cookie cut methodologies that they use. They have their own materials. They put you through that and they tell you that they're going to use the communicative approach to teach you. Well, language is just not the communicative approach, and we cannot take cookie cut approaches to teaching language. So the answer, should we just rely on language schools? Well, we need language schools, but and I'm the owner of three, but I have to say that depending on the needs of the participants, we do try to tailor and cater to the personal needs of students. They don't
Mm-hmm.
all come with the same needs, nor the same knowledge of language, and we've got to get
Right.
them up to the point that they want to reach, and everybody has a different goal. Yes, language schools can be very reliable, but there's a lot out there that might not be reliable. So I always tell people, be careful and shop around and look to see what language schools are really going to fit your needs. So if you find a reliable one, go for it and test it out and see what happens.
Sure. Next question. What are mock tests? Why are these tests important?
Well, I want to put that in the context of exam-oriented learning, okay? Because, there's different kinds of mock tests. But if you're doing an exam-oriented course and you're the teacher of that course, I always assume, or I used to assume,
Yeah.
I soon learned later that that was not so, is that all teachers who are doing exam-oriented classes for students, preparation classes, know the exam very well. And the
Okay.
truth is, many of them don't.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, and so I make sure that any teacher that we hire for exam-oriented learning knows the exam very well, every single part of that exam, and can walk through the students through that exam. But the only way to reduce stress in an exam-oriented learning process is that the teacher not only has to know the exam, but has access to the mock exams. So in other words, once we prepare the students, we do in a step-by-step basis. Maybe now for us, we always do 4 to 6 mock exams before the actual test date. We need that information to see how students are performing. That is important for us. And we give those results back to the teacher. So the teacher sees, oh, well, and we take statistics on that, okay? And that's a very, time-consuming process, but we want to make sure we're getting that right. And so we give those statistics back to the teacher and say, well, you have 20 students, and in the reading part, they only did 68% average. So we got to do more concentration on reading. And then we look at the writing part and we say, well, they were pretty good with writing in the B level. So let's, reduce some of the writing and let's do more concentration on reading. And that's how we handle our mock exams. We use this as an instrument to steer the learning and exam preparation process. So by the time the students get to the mock exam, they feel good about themselves. They're confident and the stress levels are reduced. So are these tests important? Yes, extremely important.
Great. Next question. How to de-stress from exam anxiety?
Well, this is a cultural thing, I think. I want to approach it first from a cultural aspect.
Okay.
I've traveled around the world. I've, seen how different cultures approach exams. And, some cultures just love exams, okay? They actually do well with them, rote learning and all the different, very I hate to use this word, but it's a very tyrannical approach to this, you know. Well, I live in Northern Europe, and, you know, exams are extremely important in not just getting through school, but also for getting a job. And Europeans know that they're going to have to take these exams. And so we, you know, from what I just said about how we do the mock exams, that's one way to distress, okay, de-stress from the exam.
Yeah,
Uh, but you know, I always tell students, make sure that you're resting, make sure that you're eating right, make sure that you're sleeping, make
mhm,
sure that you don't just study 6 hours at a time. Do it in intervals. Don't ever try to study for more than 45 minutes. We tell them you need to take breaks, and this is going to help to de-stress that anxiety that they're going to be feeling about the exam. Of
very good.
course, with all the other things
Mhm.
that they need to do.
Okay. Next question. Why should students minimize distractions while studying?
I want to ask you to elaborate on that a little bit before I say anything.
Yeah, like scientifically, it's wrong to multitask, to force your mind to work on more than one skill at the same time. So what really happens is that the capacity of the brain decreases. It convinces you that you are working on more than one item, but the fact it is not. So
Mhm,
like focusing on your study, being calm, being in a quiet place helps your mind to focus more, to generate more.
mhm. Well, I believe that students who do well on exams are usually students who form study groups. So, one of the first things that I always tell students is to form study groups and do it in intervals. Again, back to the 45 minutes that we suggest to them. And there's going to be distractions, socializing going on, but they got to find a way to, focus on for 45 minutes on one particular thing, like speaking or maybe writing, and they help each other. And we teach them how to do that in the learning process that we implement at my school, but I also do it at the university. And yes, we're going to get distracted. I don't think that distractions are bad, but because we do need to distract ourselves. We need to. We just can't sit there for 4 hours and learn, learn, learn. That's not going to be very effective, and that's actually going to increase anxiety. So I think uh, they should form a study group, learn with each other, time their learning, and see what they're doing and how successful they are in those 45 minutes, and then take a break.
Yeah, good. Okay, next
Besides, and then come
question.
back to that.
A very good question. Okay. What is practical implementation of language concepts?
Again, I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that. Okay.
Okay, like for us, we are not native speakers, and we don't know everything about the target language. So sometimes we have the ideas, sometimes we have like we read something, but we cannot express it properly in the target language. Maybe we miss the suitable vocabulary, the suitable grammar, or the suitable context. It's quite
Mhm,
challenging for non-native speakers to realize and understand the context of the language.
mhm. Well, I'm going to approach this from a personal
Yeah.
life experience. Okay. Again, I said I speak 4 languages, and German's very real for me, so I don't need to be practicing German. But I believe that we need to go, beyond. Is learning only something that happens in the classroom, or is learning something that we can take outside the classroom? And what are we doing to? What strategies are we creating to make the language real for us?
Mhm.
Now, I am in a group. I'm in 2 groups, and I joined these groups not as a teacher. I joined them because I wanted to improve my French and I wanted to improve my Spanish. And I'm also in an English group. The tandem night includes all the languages, but I'm in a group of, and I think this is where we need to be realistic about, what language are we striving for? Do we want to sound like a native speaker? We want to, that everybody thinks we're from England or America or
Yeah.
whatever. I think that's very unrealistic. And I have to say that I'm in a group of international people. They're all expats. We meet once a month. We meet in a pub. I personally, I don't drink alcohol, but I drink Coke or something. And they drink beer because we meet in an Irish pub. They're all non-native speakers, and we play games. We play board games with one another, and that makes it very interesting. We interact, and none of them are native speakers. Most of them. Sometimes I'm the only native speaker there. I don't go there to correct their English because I'm learning from them on how they use language and how they make language real for them and the strategies that they create in speaking English. So really what I see is English lingua franca in action. And
Yeah,
so what I'm saying here is, why don't you try to find a group of non-native speakers and see how language works and practice it, and make mistakes and see what works and doesn't work. Nobody's correcting you. It's not a test. It's fun.
yeah.
I love it. I love it. And I don't have to drink beer with them or alcohol with them. I just, I come home actually drunk on the happiness that I've had with them, uh, and I love it. And I look forward to those evenings because I'm not a teacher, I'm a learner.
So
Mhm.
this leads exactly into the next question. How to turn our hobbies into fun study aids.
Well, I like learning. Okay, so and learning is a sort of a hobby for me. And I think if you're a good teacher, you should be a good learner. And because a lot of times, we meet teachers who just want to teach but don't want to learn. That's the oxymoron and the dark side of teaching. And there's a lot of them out there. Okay, they just want to teach, 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 but not learn, learn, learn. And teaching is about lifelong learning. So again, I'm an avid learner. I like learning, and I try to put myself in situations where I can learn. But we can turn our hobbies into uh, study aids. I'll use myself as an example again. When I first moved to Germany, I could speak German, but I
Mhm.
was scared to because I was afraid I was going to make mistakes and people were going to judge me. And I
Yeah,
spoke with an accent and all of those things. But I learned that if I joined some clubs where, I had a special interest and we shared the same interest, I could learn from them and they could be my teachers, even though it wasn't a language class. So I always said, turn your hobby into a learning experience and join a club maybe. Go to a group of expats and join them and see how they use the language, and then you'll be comfortable with it, and it'll be easier for you to adapt to the language. You don't have to sound like you're British. In fact, I sort of get a little bit angry at people who want to hide their accent. They're denying their culture. They're denying who they are. Uh,
yeah.
Actually, I find people who speak English with an accent much more interesting than those who try to have a fake accent. So I think, get in tune with your culture, who you're from, and get comfortable with your accent because that's part of your identity.
Sure. Okay, the next question. I don't know how you will relate both of them. What does it mean to learn the real language?
Well, that's what I was just talking about right now is, what is the real language? Do we want to sound like a Cockney from London and that's real for us? Do we want to sound like somebody from Yorkshire? Do we want to sound like somebody from New York? Now, I have to say that I'm highly influenced by, American cultures, dialects and accents because I grew up in America. I was born there, socialized there, acculturated there. American English is my mother language. Uh, but it took many years for me to speak the way I do because I had to get rid of some of the accents that I had. And, people would say, "Oh, you're from New York." And I was like, uh, "How
Mm.
did you know that?" But, I think our language, our accent, our pronunciation, that changes as we get more and more into the language. But again, surround yourself not just with native speakers because you want to be like them.
Mhm.
Don't forget your identity. Don't forget who you are in your culture. I didn't forget my culture or become a different person because I started speaking German or English or French. I'm still Ron in all of those languages. My religious beliefs, my beliefs about life, are the same, and I can articulate those in those languages
Sure.
because I'm comfortable with that, and that's what makes a language real,
Mhm.
and not that we have to change and adapt ourselves to that language.
Sure. Okay, the next question, how to personalize the exam or how to personalize our answer to the exam?
Well, I think that's a really good question because we know we can't choose the questions that are coming in the exam. Okay. We know that they're there. Okay. But if we're a good exams teacher, we know, every single question and we know, how to prepare our students for that. We should be involving experiential learning into that. Now, students, and this gets into ready-made mind maps and using the course book and learning how the European framework for languages work. Now, you said that you prepare people for the IELTS test. Uh, and in the listening part, they're going to listen to different speakers
Yeah.
with different dialects sometimes, but mostly British. And this is where sometimes I get really, I'm against a lot of that uh, because it should include different accents, not just from England, Ireland, and Scotland, uh, but also from Canada, Australia, South Africa, where language is the primary, English is the primary language. But also within those countries, there's different cultures who speak that language, and exposing them to Indian English and all of these things. That's real life, and I think exams need to consider that when they're putting these tests together. But personalizing our answers, we have to learn and teach students how to do that so that they're comfortable with that. Because, some of these exams are very strictly graded, and sometimes they don't like answers like that. They want cookie cut answers a lot of the times. And a lot of the teachers who are doing exam oriented learning try to get students to do cookie cut answers. But it should be personal. And that personal means from life experience. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I think that we should help our students to create that language, use their life experience, who they're from, their social capital, whatever, to personalize their answers.
Yeah, that's very good. Okay, it has been a great pleasure to have you here today.
Thank
and
you
we
for
will,
inviting me.
and certainly we'll meet again.
I'm sure we will.
Okay.